Welcome to Confessions of a Surf Lady. We're so stoked to have you here. I don't know if you know, but I actually wasn't familiar with your work prior to meeting you and becoming familiar with it a couple weeks ago. I'm super stoked because I have so much enjoyed the writing, and it's kind of opened up like a new era of surf journalism that I wasn't aware of, that just kind of hasn't reached my generation so much. So I'd love for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work and how accomplished you are, for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Matt George. I have been a senior contributing editor to Surfer Magazine for over 35 years. I was a former professional surfer that was lucky enough to become a surf journalist before the social media got so big. However, we're going to be discussing my new book, In Deep, which is a collection of my greatest published stories over the 35 years. And it is a book for young people. It's not some history book. It's not a memoir, as you know. It's not some boring thing. It is a collection of stories that really reflect the zeitgeist, and as the title In Deep implies, it gets very, very much behind the curtain of professional surfers, professional contests, professional people, and the great surf spots of the world. The reason that it's for young people, Laura, is because you don't have to read it cover to cover. It's a series of short magazine type stories that you can pick and choose with. You can thumb through it and see whether you like this or that. And the reason that I was so interested in your podcast is that I very much, all my life, I've written very, very positively and powerfully, I believe, about the power of women's surfing. And when you pick up this book, if the ladies are listening out there, and I hope they are, there's a number of profiles and travel pieces and essays on female surfing and female surfers, particularly the big heroes like Stephanie Gilmore, Lane Beachley, Keala Kennelly, and more. So I'm on your podcast because I'm very much a believer in female surfing.
We absolutely love to hear that. And so as you know, our listeners are really women who enjoy the water and also underrepresented minority groups. So I think this is a really special opportunity, specifically because I would say you're from an older media era where there was more curation, maybe more gatekeeping, maybe more of a hierarchy to get into publishing your work, versus I'm from a very new media era where, I turned on a mic 4 years ago, and I have now this opportunity to tell my story and tell stories of other people through this podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the way media used to work and the way media works now, and how surf journalism fits into all of that.
Okay, that's fantastic. And it's really exciting to think about. I'll start with saying that I do not feel old school at all. I feel very much involved in the modern surfing world. As you know, Kelly Slater wrote the foreword to the book, and I'm in contact with surfers, both male and female, from the age of 10 years old to our older silverbacks, who are being honored to this day as they reach the autumn years of their life. So what it used to be like was that, let's say Surfer Magazine came out every 2 months when I first started working for them. And it was the social media. Therefore, you had to subscribe or pick up that magazine to find out what was going on out there with our tribe. And it was very powerfully it was a very powerful influencer, the magazine itself. Now, the main difference is that in the earlier days, in order to learn about these heroes and these fantastic places and these wild, far corners of the earth, you had to read about it in Surfer Magazine. The difference now is everybody's their own press agent, so you're not getting the truth. Everybody is very, very generic, from John Florence to my little niece. Everybody's having a wonderful life. They wake up, they hop in their cold bath, and they have a wonderful breakfast, and then they've had a wonderful time at the beach, and everybody has happy marriages and everything's wonderful and it's Mother's Day and wow, and everybody's very, very generic. So what's the difference between Griffin Colapinto, Griffin Colapinto, Caroline Marks, or John John? Absolutely nothing. It's all just press releases, little tiny press releases with little emoticons. And so I think the surfing world is very much being robbed, particularly from the female surfing point of view. They're being robbed about the truth behind these people that we could relate to, the truth behind these places, the truth behind travel, the truth behind all the adventure of surfing when you put it in context and perspective. And I think that surfing is being robbed, and I'm very, very pleased with the backlash that I hear from young people about how they really want to be heard individually and more than just a selfie on the beach, another perfect day. I think that we can relate to each other and we can relate to the surfing tribe better if we all tell the truth about our lives so we can relate. Have you had an opportunity to read any of the profiles, Laura, that I've written about surfers?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have.
What's your favorite? What was your favorite?
Oh, I mean, the Bethany Hamilton one that you also did a reading of at the California Surf Museum the other week, really, really emotionally just had such a great pull. Also, mostly because I was growing up also while this was happening, so I remember seeing Bethany in the news. I also, know Bethany as far as like the surfer she is now, following her on Instagram, being on her newsletter list and all of that. So to kind of go back in time and have a more intimate look at that situation was really, really had more of the emotional pull than maybe, let's say, the movie Soul Surfer,
Sure.
even in just a short few pages. So it's really, I would say that is one of the ones I recommend anybody that picks up this book to read right away.
Well, thank you. You're making my head like big as a pumpkin, but the thing is, I very much, as you know, as I've said a number of times already on this podcast, there's a reason I led this entire book. The very first story is about a woman, Bethany Hamilton. And it is that very intimate story that I went over there and covered very shortly after, just a number of weeks after she had been attacked. And it was important to me to present this book with a lead-off story about a woman and her courage and her power, because in my experience, Laura, I have found all the female surfers that I've written about very courageous and very powerful. And all the men that I've written about, I've found them very vulnerable and almost weak compared to the women.
I have a question. As far as your writing, especially that story, there's really like an intimacy with it, almost not just with her personal story and what happened to her, but your relationship with the writing itself, with the piece itself. And I think that shines through. Do you, as a writer, what emotions do you go through when you're about to release a piece that you've just written? Because you're, what kind of vulnerability do you have with it? You're about to show it to the world at the same time.
That's a really good question. First of all, one of my techniques, and I think it'd be a technique of anybody that actually sees the world, that actually really sees the world beyond the screen of a phone, someone that, and I know there's a lot of people out there that are like that, and a lot of people listening right now. When I meet someone to do something as personal as a profile, as a feature article on somebody, I very much look for what they're not saying, not exactly what they're saying, but what they're not saying. It's almost like Instagram. I could see your Instagram and I would wonder what Laura Day, what is she not saying? There's the story. That's what's interesting. And so what I feel when these stories come out is a sense of pride that I was able to get in deep. That I was able to get into the story and to commit myself to it. So a lot of it is pride, and the other one is, I would say, trepidation, because not only do I want the audience to read it, but I want the subject to learn something from it as well, because it's always unexpected. And so I feel a combination of pride, as any writer would when he knows he's getting published work or she is getting published work, and of course, acceptance. I have written stories, as you know, when you go through that book, that have sent shockwaves through the surfing world. Keala Kennelly coming out as a woman, Lane Beachley learning her own name, Stephanie Gilmore with her trip to G-Land, surfing better than the men, Aaron Brooks getting into the finals of the Padang Cup in the heaviest surf in the world, and beating a field of accomplished men to reach that. And so it's a joy, really, Laura, to be able to present to the world a far deeper look, not only into the person that they're reading about, but into ourselves as surfers. We are a very unique fringe-dwelling tribe, and we're connected to something absolutely extraordinary, connected to the cosmos, really, different than other sports. This is not having a tea time for golf. It's not, you're not playing tennis. You're not even sliding down a mountain. You are riding a band of energy that comes from a place that we all crawled from millions and millions of years ago. And so when we go out onto the sea and we face this challenge and we get this joy or fear or desire, and then we get back on land, it's like having been in outer space. So I think that surfing is should be examined on a much deeper level than weekend soccer with the kids.
Knowing, that the industry has been historically male dominated, did you find it difficult covering women in the industry? Did you ever hit any roadblocks, especially with underrepresented surfers like women?
Yes, and also underrepresented ethnic surfers, but mostly women. Yes, the roadblocks I ran into was, we can't print this, Matt. And I'm like, well, why not? And it's like, well, I mean, she's like the L word, and I'm like, excuse me, what difference does that make? And so I've had those conversations. I approach writing about women as that they are equal heroes. They're equal to men. And as I've mentioned earlier, and many times, far more courageous, considering the challenges they face, the physical challenges, the social challenges, the misogyny of surfing. And yes, I have had to convince editors that this is an important thing. They go, you're making Lane Beachley, sound like she's as important as Kelly Slater. And I would just stop and go, she is, so I've had those conversations, yes, and they've been irritating, quite frankly, but not all the time. I have had fantastic editors like my brother Sam, who feels the same way, and Matt Warshaw, Paul Holmes, these people that I'm not trying to disparage my former editors, but yes, very much. I've had top professional surfers coming to me. Why are you doing a story on her? What are you doing a story on her for? She's just a chick, and I've actually got into fistfights over that. And so, yes, I have encountered the misogyny. I've gone up against it, and I feel that I've been very successful, Laura.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I think, particularly coming from a person like me who is from an underrepresented culture in surfing, I'm Filipino and I'm a woman. So having a conversation with you, who's someone that's worked intimately in a male-dominated surf industry for decades, and hearing that there have been advocates for people like me, even if I'm not a professional surfer, but people that represent me, it's comforting to hear that, because for women that like me that are in the water, we still face that kind of attitude toward us just in the lineup. It doesn't even have to be pro surfing. So I think this is a great opportunity to shed light on that. For me, it's just something I've loved about surfing is every time I learn a little bit more, whether it's actually surfing in the water or culture or like your book, Surf Journalism, I just see surfing unfolding into this infinite world of content, ideas, experiences. And this is another one of those special moments, I think, having this conversation with you. So I just have to share that with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Can you give our listeners more insight on your process? Because you have a very specific process when you cover a subject for one of your stories.
Well, my brother Sam, as you know, he's another famous surfer that became a journalist, and we were the George brothers when we were pro surfers, and we're very much, connected at the hip. He's even on the cover of the magazine. I mean, the cover of the book, as you know. And he actually gave me the name of this book, which was called In Deep, and I went, all right, explain. He goes, well, Matt, you were embedded in these stories before they even invented that word. It's total immersion. So here's my technique: commitment, immersion, and connection. And the reason, one of my techniques that I would do when they'd say, hey, go do a story on John or go do a story on Kelly, I would let everyone know, both the subject and the magazine, that I would not do it unless I was able to live with that person for at least 5 days. And by living with them, I mean in their house, in their environment. I've slept on a lot of couches. I've slept at the foot of Ron Machado's bed. I have slept in Keala Kennelly's extra bedroom. I have slept, as you know, I've famously slept next to Kelly in the same bed. I've get connected. Like I always say, if I leave and I don't know your mother's maiden name, I'm not going to do the story. But it takes, I would suggest young writers out there to not fall into the pattern of meeting with someone with your little recorder in a coffee shop for 15 or 20 minutes. If you want to get into a deep dive, I suggest sacrificing yourself almost, and sacrificing your ego and your time and all these things by being with them, almost like going on a hunting trip and being with them and see how they react to people and look for those little special moments. Another technique that I use is I very rarely use a tape recorder. I'm lucky enough to have a gift of a great memory for dialogue and for what people say. And I'm not saying I just walk around and remember it all, because at the end of the day, I empty my pockets on these stories, and I'll even pick up a piece of litter while I'm going out to the car to get something and I'll always have a pen on me. I have one on me right now, and you just scribble down a little note and stuff it in your pocket, and you can think about it later. So I've had it on ice cream wrappers. I've had it on little pieces of napkins and scraps and anything I can find. And it's very, very, very unobtrusive to the person, because they don't realize I'm collecting these special moments. Now, when I have a chance, if no one's watching, I'll click my phone on and I'll say, he tripped over the curb, and I'll leave it at that. And I collect those at the end of the thing. Or he pet the dog in a very, behind the ear. He scrubbed the dog behind the ears and called him buddy boy. You know what I mean? And I'll do these little things. And at the end of the day, when I can catch my breath, or even after 5 days, I'll empty my pockets and I'll literally lay it out on the floor. And it's a mosaic. It becomes a mosaic on the floor of the kitchen. And then I'll start moving these little pieces of paper around until that mosaic becomes like a jigsaw puzzle that makes sense. Now, I know that's an old school technique, but it works. Another thing that I do is I never put a recording device between myself and the subject. If I am recording, I handle the recording device as if it is nothing. And I just set it aside, or I'll toss it down, or I won't okay, testing, is this thing on? Hello, clunk, put it in front of you, Laura, like right near your chest, and go, okay, can we test that? Click. Okay, good, we have sound. Okay, now, so where were you born? It's like, no. Total comfort and trust with that person. And the other thing that I do is I'm very conscious of looking this person straight in the eye. They are the only person in the world at that moment. It's almost like being with a lover. You know, it is, you are the only person I'm interested in. I'm not checking my phone. I'm not looking over your shoulder. An ambulance could go by and I would not break my eye contact. I think that's really important for trust. Yes. You know, that works for romance too, Laura. Did you know that?
Tips for the guys.
Tips for the guys
Yeah.
out there. If any of the guys are listening out there, man, don't break the eye contact.
So is there any story that got away? Like, is there a story that you ever wanted to cover, or a story that maybe you did write about, or things that you have in your journal that you feel like never got the chance to get published?
Yes, and this one was actually published, but it was so awful that I consider it not published. I committed a crime. I committed a terrible crime. I was to do a story on the great Shaun Thompson, 1977 world champion. I don't know if your generation's ever heard of him, but he was our John Florence. And I went to do the story in Santa Cruz. And there was a couple of factors happening. I was deeply in a deep state of heartache. I was in a terrible place with a great amount of heartache. This was in, probably 90s, late 90s, early 90s or something. But I got an opportunity to do a story on the great Shaun Thompson at the Santa Cruz contest. And I'm from the Santa Cruz area, and I thought, great. But I got up there, my head wasn't right. I did not control the situation. I knew Shaun Thompson. I used to compete against him. I knew who he was. He knows how to control his environment. He's very intellectual. He knows how to present himself exactly the way he wants to be presented. And I was in such a weakened emotional state because of my heartbreak that I let him walk all over me, even though we were friends. So we ended up in a hotel. We weren't even in a hotel room. He walked me into the hotel office. He wouldn't even let me in his room. And we had a microphone between us. And I asked him 3 questions, and I was so bored out of my skull at that point that I said, "That'll do. That's great. Thanks so much for your time, Shaun." And I left. I had to write that story. I had to. And I had 3 silly, generic questions from this great man, this great surfer. And I knew his story. I'd grown up with him in that era, and I'd surfed against. I've been to South Africa, Brazil. I've been all these places with him. And I wrote a shitty feature, and it was boring, and it was forgettable. And they published it. And to this day, I'm ashamed of it. I think it's the only time that I didn't achieve excellence. So I would suggest to all the young female writers out there that when they come up against, say, they're doing an article about a famous surfing man, do not let them dictate what is going on. You are in charge. You are Kelly Slater. You are the person that is making that person somebody. You are creating their myth. You are important. You are not sitting at their feet. You are a peer. That's why Kelly always called me, goes, "Matt, you're the Kelly Slater of journalism," And I take that as an extreme compliment. And I want to inspire the women out there to please feel that way. No man is going to control his profile because of you. If he's egotistical and tries to control it, write about that. Write about how he's egotistical. Write about how he's misogynist. Write about how he's trying to control the environment. Get into it. Don't let them tell you who they are. Like most men, most men try to tell women who they are so they can kiss them on the lips, and don't let them do that as a journalist.
It's really good advice. Give me one moment.
Sure.
What would you say? So to women who aren't, or even just anybody, surfers who aren't necessarily journalists, but we're all, like you said, we're all our own little PR agencies with our Instagram accounts and everything. What's your advice to them for documenting their experience? Because I think the way that you've encapsulated all these stories, there's something that you go back to after 35 years. I'm sure you must feel a sense of pride, and you read through it and you feel like you were there and you remember these moments. What's your advice for the social media generation in documenting their own surf stories?
Write about other people. Stop writing about yourself. Stop it right now on your Instagram. Know that if you write about other people in a compelling way, everyone's going to pay attention to you, and they're going to want to hear more about you, and you're going to develop your voice. If you just heard blah, blah, blah about yourself all the time, people just scroll right past. But Laura Day is talking to John Florence. Whoa, you think they're going to remember what John said? No, they're going to remember that Laura Day talked to John Florence. And they're going to trust you, and you're going to get more followers, and you're going to get more of what you want, and people are going to know you better through your stories. If you read the stories in this book, I'm very much part of it. There I am sitting on the beach holding Lane Beachley's hand. There I am with Bethany Hamilton driving home in the rain. There I am with Keala Kennelly, living with her in Honolulu, listening to her try to explain the world, her sexual orientation. There I am. And that's how you become Matt George. And that's how you become Laura Day. You don't become it by talking about yourself. You become Laura Day by becoming a conduit to others. And the people will come to you to plug into that conduit. So when it comes to documenting your own surfing life, start writing about how you feel about other surfers.
Did you have any particular influences or inspiration? How did you really develop your writing style? I think it's very unique in, from other surf media that I've read, especially if you're putting a book in front of me written by basically, a male. My interest in it would be like, okay, let me check this out. And a lot of times I've been like, well, this doesn't really speak to me so much. Whereas, reading in deep, I really feel like it's almost like little novellas, but true stories. So you're really pulled in with the imagery. How did you develop your writing style and the way that you convey these characters or convey these people that you're covering?
Laura, first of all, may I say that was so insightful of you. That was the word novella. I don't know if a lot of your listeners out there know that, but a novella is not a short story and it's not a novel. It's right in between. And that is precisely how I approached my writing with these magazine articles. I considered them novellas with three acts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, to answer your question, my generation in particular, particularly myself, I was always a voracious reader. I know that your generation rarely reads books. They've been presented everything digitally, everything's on a computer or a little screen, everything, the curse of this short attention span. We've all heard that, your generation has an attention span of a flea. We've heard all those terrible things. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. I know that your generation can pay attention, for example, to their social media for 24 hours a day. I don't believe that you have short attention spans. I think it's a myth. What happened to me when I was young, my mother was a school teacher, and we were just voracious readers. My big influences were John Steinbeck, who your generation probably doesn't know, a great author named Pete Dexter. There's another author who gave me a lot of my grandiosity. His name was Joseph Conrad, Jules Verne, Herman Melville, all these fantastic, because it was my TV. And so I read and read and read. And to this day, my Kindle, I have over 6,000 books on my Kindle, and people say, hang on a second, you've read these? Every one of them, So if you want to really become a good writer, even of short stories or a novella or even a novel. Start reading a lot. It's the same thing as if you start taking your social media and turning it into talking to other people like the way you are right now. Read, read, read. I know that is the most boring advice, and it makes me sound like somebody's dad, but I don't care. The other technique, which is really simple when it comes to journaling, is once a day, and this is real easy because, I teach creative writing at a university level. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But what I teach students to do is to write one sentence down about their 6 senses at the end of the day. What did I hear today? One sentence, something special, a bird scream, a coyote howl. What did I touch with my hands? What did I touch? What did I see with my eyes? These are one sentence questions. What did I smell today that was interesting? What did I taste? And finally, the 6th point is, what did I see in somebody else's eyes? You will have then told the entire beautiful story of your day, of that day. And it will also be a great writing prompt for you to expand on it if, in fact, later you want to come back and look at these notes to do this. It's like a mini daily memoir. People sit down to journal, Laura, and they're like, oh gosh, I've got to be so heavy. Today I felt that I was, connected with myself like I never have before. And as the sun was going down, I felt like, the universe is trying to help me. Oh, please, make it practical. I heard a coyote. I heard a coyote howl. I felt the rail of my surfboard. I saw a beautiful offshore wave breaking. I smelled a pile of pancakes that I ate. They were fantastic. And when I say taste, it can't be food. I tasted the salt water on my lips when I pushed through that wave. And I saw loneliness in this person across the cafe. I think that person was lonely. Bingo. There you are. There's your journal. Now, getting back to the short subject writing, just because it's a short subject does not mean it can't be a movie. As you know, the Lane Beachley story, it's 3 pages long, and it is a saga. It is a saga. And as a matter of fact, I'm being approached just now to make it into a big Hollywood movie. And that's 3 pages, okay? Remember, beginning, middle, and end. Another technique I have is that first sentence and the last sentence are like ringing a bell. The first sentence, has got to grab you, like, the last camel died at noon, and all of a sudden you're like, well, what happened next? I know, where were you? Were you in the Sahara or something? Or, what was going on? The last camel died at noon. He sleeps like an angel. I once held hands with Lane Beachley on the far side of the world. Remember that first line. Another tip, never start a story with I was walking down the street. Even if you were walking down the street, you could say, walking down the street, I saw a dog, rather than I saw a dog while I was walking down the street. Do not start with I. It turns people off. And it takes them away from themselves. Remember, you're writing for others. Another tip that I have is to write for somebody. I very much write for my brother Sam. We're so close, and we're intellectually peers. We get each other. And I want to impress him. So there's nothing wrong with picking someone you want to write about. But this brings another point. When you're writing about friends and family, don't protect them. Do not protect them. Speak the truth. If you're not speaking the truth, put your pen down. Forget it. Like I said during my reading, if you're not writing at a tearful level, stop. Mm-hmm. Okay, and be brave. If there's something about your mother, my mother was an alcoholic. I've written about that. I haven't said, oh, my mother was the sweetest thing on earth, and her birthdays were always when she made me waffles in the morning. Bullshit. Get into it or get out of it.
Speaking of which, what kind of repercussions have you experienced with any of the articles in Deep being so real about the stories? I mean, specifically, there's Keala's story, but any other that you can speak on that, or any other repercussions you've experienced from writing any of these?
Okay, great question, Laura. I'm glad to answer it. Number one, the Kelly Slater story. I think I was 27 years old and I was in bed with a 17-year-old Kelly. Okay. Now, let me explain to your readers how that happened. I grew up in a family with 4 brothers in one room, so I was quite used to it. And not many people realize that Kelly Slater came from a very, very, very humble background. They think he's just had this golden spoon, 11 world titles, millionaires, wave pools. Oh, what an easy life. Bullshit. When I saw him at 17 years old, he was the son of a single mother, and they were living on the floor of a shotgun shack in Florida. And all they had was mattresses on the floor with moving blankets that they'd stolen from the, well, not stolen, but that they had from the moving truck. And so when his mother said, "Oh, Matt, you're going to be bunking with Kelly," I thought, yeah, no problem, because I had brothers. So the whole story opens up with the words, "He sleeps like an angel." And I was next to him and he'd fallen asleep first. And I looked over at him and I thought, what a perspective. And so I was literally writing about Kelly as he was sleeping. Now, you can imagine when I turned in that story, the editors at Surfer Magazine were, what the hell? We're going to get arrested, Matt. This guy's underage, and you're in bed with him. And I'm like, well, if you read the next paragraph, you'll see that I explain all this, And so, but that first paragraph, man. So what happened was the editor changed it. He changed the story out of fear of homophobia and repercussions from people to where I was standing in his doorway of his bedroom watching him sleep, which is way creepier.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Than if I was in bed next to him. His mother was, oh my God, his mother was so angry. She called me up. "If I would have known you're wandering around my house at night watching us sleep, I would have shot you, And I'm like, "Ma'am, please, you got to believe me, So, so anyway, yeah, that was that repercussion. The other point I want to make is as honest as these stories been, and in many ways brutally honest, I've never had any repercussions from the subjects. No one's punched me in the mouth or disparaged me or anything. Quite often they've come to me and said, "You've made my life better." So this is why I encourage all the female writers out there to have that courage and tell the truth. The heaviest one for me of all was Keala. She was so honest. The whole story about her isn't just about her sexual orientation at all. I'm sure you've read it. But it's mentioned. That classic line she had where she said, "It took a woman to make a woman out of me." Now, fantastic. What had happened is she was so open about it and she trusted me so much. I mean, she'd get me in the bathroom and put on makeup and ask me, "Hey, does this look good?" We were into it, I'm like, "Yeah, it looks great, Keala." At any rate, the story came out in the magazine before she had the chance to talk to her parents. So I basically outed her to the world. And that really upset her. She didn't expect this to come out before she had a chance to talk to her family. And we didn't even discuss her discussing this. I thought it was just so open. I filed my story and it got published with my great portraits of her and that incredibly positive story about how brave and courageous and strong she is and all these things. And her family just went, "Whoa, man, that was quite a bomb." And so she had to deal with that. And our relationship was strained for, I'd say, a number of years. And then one day I met her at Uluwatu She was at Uluwatu in Bali, where I live. And I saw her, and she walked over to me and she said, look, I'm not going to apologize because I still think it was unfair, but I want you to know it made my life better. I faced my honesty, I faced my family, and I got a television show out of it. So we hugged with tears in our eyes. And I said, Cal, I'm so glad you're back because I've always loved you. You know, I loved you when I did that story, and I love you now, you know? And so that was a real cathartic moment for me, because I did feel bad about that for many years. But you've got to have the courage to do this. Again, you have got to, I'm not saying run out there and out all your friends. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, tell the story honesty and take your knocks. And if someone wants to walk up and punch you in the nose, take it. But it was honest, you know? So that's my advice to the women writers out there. And
So
if it's a man that punches you in the nose, then knock his teeth out. How about that? Okay.
So if on Confessions of a Surf Lady, something that makes our podcast really special is that we release these prompts and people confess to them. They're allowed to share their opinions anonymously, or they can share who they are. So I'd love to ask you some of the same questions so some of our listeners can relate to you, because they have their own answers to some of these questions.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You have questions that come in from your listeners, and you're going to ask me the same question, or are they asking me questions?
The other way around. So I ask them questions and they submit confessions. They do their confession. Right. So first one, have you ever almost drowned or been really scared in the surf? What was that situation, and what's that story like?
Yes, I've actually drowned twice officially and been brought back to life.
Oh, wow.
I am not a big wave surfer. I don't know if your listeners, I'm not sure if your listeners know that I produced and wrote a film called In God's Hands. It was a big feature film that starred Shane Dorian, and it's a big drama, a big Hollywood feature. It came out in 1998. So everybody out there, run out to Amazon or whatever you have to do and watch this movie, because what was so unique about it was that I wrote it, of course, which was neat. And what was really great about it was that we all did our own surfing. There was no stuntmen, no stunt work. Even the boxing scene was real. And we did it all ourselves. So you'll see handsome Shane Dorian. You'll see him acting, and actually we would do a scene with him, and then he'd have to paddle out into 60-foot jaws, and you know, it was incredible. Oh. So I would suggest, please, everyone, run to In God's Hands and find it. In God's Hands. And that term has nothing to do with any sort of religion. It was a term that we used to use when we wiped out on big waves. We would always say, well, I was in God's hands at that point. You know, I don't know if I'm coming up. So to get back to your story, yes, I've been officially brought back once by my brother. And I have always had a great fear of big waves, which is one of the reasons I made the big wave movie In God's Hands. Mm-hmm. I faced these fears. I didn't do very well. I hung in there, but I was never comfortable. So when it comes to fear in the water, boy, how do you get over that? I can only say with exposure, and particularly with friends, and I would even consider therapy if you have a deep-seated fear of the ocean. I myself, even at my age now, I am planning on engaging in, I'm going to try hypnotherapy, because I've always been uncomfortable in massive waves. And I'd like to be more comfortable, even at my age, even at this stage of my surfing. I was always more known for graceful surfing up to, say, 10-foot surf, graceful. And I was never one of those big wave hellmen, which is probably why I made that movie. I was envious of it. I was ashamed of my fears. And so I made a big, giant movie about it, where I actually die in the movie in big waves. I drowned in big waves. So I hope I've answered your question in a roundabout way.
Yeah. I'll put the link for that movie too, so everyone can check it out.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. Second one, how has surfing saved you?
That's simple. That's real easy. In 1967, my family split up. We were a Navy family traveling all around the world. And our family split up, and my father became something very rare. He was a single father in 1967 with 3 kids. And as luck would have it, Laura, he got stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And since there was no daycare back then, my dad would bring a big case of beer down to the beach in the morning. He'd give it to the beach boys. And he'd say, hey, keep an eye on these kids. They're really good swimmers. Don't worry about them. They can swim really well. And then he'd come back in the evening and pick us up. So we learned how to surf on the beaches of Waikiki with the classic beach boys like Rabbit Kakai and Leroy Achoy. And boy, did that save my brother and I. It saved our lives. Surfing was such an emotional pleasure and a physical pleasure. It made up for the family breakup and for the disappearance of our mother, and the ocean became my mom.
Wow, it's beautiful. This is actually the very first question we started the podcast with, and it's the reason why is because there was a lot of commentary on it from women that surfed. Actually, originally when I started the podcast, this was a market research survey for a different business, and there were so many responses. That's what inspired this podcast. So the question was, how do you feel about the way women are represented in the surf industry?
I'm going to answer that in 2 ways. Mm-hmm. How was I? Angry. Angry as hell. How am I? Proud now. Women, whether they are the modern female surfer, equal pay in the contests, not image driven. The industry has been able to create different avenues. You can be the badass Stephanie Gilmore, the Tyler Wright, Caroline Marks. These are not Sports Illustrated models, right? And yet they are getting the same peerage. Mick Fanning, hey Mick, who's the best surfer at Kelly's Wave Pool? Oh, Stephanie, easily. She's the only one that gets it. This is such a great time to be a female surfer, such a positive time in the media. And then you also have the longboard, what I call the Roxy girl, right? Where, you can surf in Waikiki with a straw hat on your head and a lei around your neck and surf a longboard, and you are a hardcore, respected surfer. And it's not about body image or body beauty or anything. Another thing, never has women's surfing sportswear been more attractive and more respectful. When you look at those fantastic suits that surfing suits that women are able to wear, and they look feminine, but they look tough and they look real and they look like they belong in the water. Now you take someone like Keala Kennelly that had to grow up wearing Andy Irons cast off t-shirts and trunks, or Lane Beachley, who had to wear men's trunks and t-shirts or something goofy just to be out there. Pauline Menser, these great world champions that were so deeply disrespected. Now a woman can face this world feeling good, looking good, and surfing good, and they get respected. So it's a real positive world out there for you ladies right now. Get into it.
Great to hear. So I want to end it on this. In what ways would you say that the surf industry, that surf culture, that even just the lineup, in what ways would you say that all those aspects of surfing benefit when women are respected, represented, and celebrated?
I'm going to take this back to when the outside world of Polynesia first even heard about surfing in the early 17th century. The first reports that ever came back from surfing, I think the first it was ever written about was, my brother will kill me if I get this wrong, but I believe it was the navigator of Captain Cook's book that went into Kalakakua Bay there. The very first writing from the 1700s all the way to Jack London, Mark Twain, all of it, It was about women out in the lineup. It was about surfing women. They were the graceful ones. They were the competent ones. And the men, these writers are also surprised that these women were the ones that were dominant and beautiful in the water. So from the very beginning, women surfing has been recognized in the media. How does it benefit us all? Inclusivity, sisterhood, brotherhood. It's just a better world when women are present. And I don't mean that in any sort of sensual way or any sort of misogynistic way. I believe that every single world leader in the world, it should be decreed that it has to be a woman, because a woman would never send a child to war. So it's the same way in surfing. When women are around, when they're in the lineup, when women are out there achieving and being powerful and courageous, it's a better world, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Let's make sure we tell people where they can get a hold of your book.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very, very proud of it. And I just want to reiterate to the women out there to keep going, and to the women surfers to keep surfing, and particularly to the writers, get out there and be courageous and start writing about other people. You can pick up my book for inspiration if you like. It's good for young people. Take a shot at it, be brave, and keep being part of this great evolution of this fantastic sport that we should all enjoy and respect. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you. That was such a great interview. I really, really enjoyed my time with you, and I really enjoyed meeting you in person.
Okay, Laura. Hey, I'll see you out in the lineup. Yeah, I'll see you out in the surf.
All right.
Okay.
Let's do it.
You're gonna have to give me a wave.